Good evening, and thank you for joining me this evening at Broadcasting Scotland, Scotland at 7. Later on in the programme, we have a fantastic interview with Rebecca and the Clyde Fishermen Association. But first of all, we will go through this evening's news, and we will be starting with the coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 2,521,172 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,169,257 have been confirmed negative. 351,915 have been tested positive. There are currently 250 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 7 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 7,983. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 367 were in hospital last night, 54 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,020,712 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,286,153 had received their second dose. The latest UK figures up until yesterday show 130,178 patients who have tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 92 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all hospital settings and not just hospitals. And once again, our thoughts and condolences with all the families who have lost a loved one. Now for the first story of this evening. COP26 Minister called out for quarantine-free jet setting. The UK government has been criticised for being utterly out of touch after it was revealed that a government minister travelled to around 30 countries, including those in the red list, without quarantine on his return. Alok Sharma, the minister responsible for this year's crucial COP26 summit in Glasgow, had taken advantage of an exemption that allowed him to dodge quarantining. He is currently visiting red-listed Brazil and Bolivia. On one reported occasion, Sharma visited a primary school not long after returning from Bangladesh, a red-list country. The jet-setting climate summit minister has been called out for dodging quarantine at the same time as the public face soaring costs for isolating. From next week, a solo traveller returning will now have to pay £2,285 to quarantine in a hotel, up from £1,750. Commenting, the SNP's climate change spokesman, Alan Brown MP, said at the same time as costs of quarantine in a hotel have rocketed to an eye-watering levels, Tory ministers are racking up the air miles and travelling around the world without a worry. This is just another example of utterly out of touch Tory government setting one rule for themselves and another for the rest of us. And for the next story this evening, millions of UK homes will be forced to pay some of the highest energy bills for the past decade after industry regulator gave suppliers the green light to raise their prices by up to £153 a year. Households across the UK that use a default energy tariff to buy their gas and electricity can expect a sharp increase in their bills from October this year, after the regulator lifted its energy price cap for the winter. More than 11 million households that pay by direct debit the average dual fuel bill will climb from £1,138 to £1,277 from October this year, up by £139. For another 4 million households that use prepayment meters, which are typically more socially vulnerable, the average energy bill will climb from £1,156 to £1,309, up by £153. The energy price cap rise comes on the top of a £96 a year increase to the price cap announced 6 months ago, which came into effect from April. The latest rise in the energy price cap is also expected to trigger a rise in fixed rate deals, which are usually cheaper than default tariffs, but which have been drifting higher as the UK's gas market has reached 16-year highs. The SNP's Work and Pension spokesman, David London MP, has said that the Tories have broken their promise that fuel bills would be left lower for everyone when the UK left the EU. Mr London warned that this will be a double blow for those who will lose the universal credit uplift at the same time, and renewed his call for the UK government to make the £20 uplift permanent and extend it to legacy benefits. The Glasgow East MP, who has over 10,000 people in his constituency on universal credit, launched a campaign this week urging people to reject Rishi's universal credit crunch and calling on the Chancellor to U-turn on the cuts that will put 500,000 more people below the poverty line. Now for the next story of this evening. The SNP MP for Scotland's National Mining Museum has invited Boris Johnson to return to Scotland to visit a local mining community, so he can apologise in person for his offensive comments praising Thatcher's decision to close the mines. Owen Thompson MP, who represents former mining communities in Midlothian, has written to the Prime Minister urging him to accompany the MP to the National Mining Museum in Scotland and visit former miners and their families, so he can apologise in person and see firsthand the devastation caused by Thatcher's industrial policies. And we will definitely let you know if Mr Johnson takes that offer up. And now for the next story of this evening. Positive COVID cases in the armed forces have risen by their highest number so far this year. Analysts of the official figures by the all-party parliamentary group, I've not got the teeth in this evening, on coronavirus has revealed. The number of positive cases increased by 1,474 in the 2 weeks up to the 23rd of July, the steepest rise of 2021, according to the Ministry of Defence statistics published today. This brings the total number of positive cases in the armed forces since the beginning of the pandemic to 11,890, with 6,510 in the Army, 3,408 in the Navy and 1,972 in the RAF. The APPG on coronavirus is calling for the government to take urgent action to boost vaccine uptake among troops and protect them from the virus, warning the rising cases pose a threat to national security. It comes after recent figures revealed that 55,000 Armed Forces personnel have not yet been vaccinated against COVID-19. Now moving on. The East Livingston and East Calder by-election, called after the death of long-serving Labour councillor and Deputy Provost Dave King, has been won by the SNP candidate Tom Ullathorne, with 42.5% of the first preference vote, an increase of 1.7% on the 2017 results. Labour votes fell by 9%, while the Greens and Conservatives votes increased by 4% and 2.4% respectively. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon responded to the result by tweeting, "Yay! Many congratulations to newest SNP councillor Tom Ullathorne and his team. Brilliant result." The East Livingston and East Calder West Lothian by-election first preferences SNP 1,890, which was 42.5%, which is up 1.7. Conservative received 1,085, which is 24.4%, which is up 2.4. Labour had received 969 votes, which is 21.8% of the voting, and that was down by 9.1. The Greens received 336 votes, with that respectively is 7.6%, and they were up 4.0. Liberal Democrats received 118 votes, and which is 2.7% of the vote, and there was no change there. The ISP received 47 votes, which was 1.1% of the vote, and that was up by 1.1. Now moving on. A Russian lesbian family who received death threats after they appeared in an advertisement for the food chain Cuscfil say they feel safe in Barcelona and accepted for who they are. The family were targeted in a hate campaign on social media after they appeared in the ad. The company later apologised and replaced the photo with one of a heterosexual family. We don't feel safe in Russia because of its homophobic laws, Mila, the family's younger daughter, said. Lots of chat rooms published our Instagram accounts and email addresses. There were a lot of stupid comments, but also terrifying ones, like the picture of an axe covered in blood. Her mother, Yuma, and partner Zena appeared in the ad with their two daughters under the slogan Recipes for a Happy Family. But the company quickly withdrew the campaign after receiving a mass of hate mail. After Cuscfil posted an apology saying that publishing the photograph showed a lack of professionalism on part of its employees, the family was bombarded with phone calls and hate mail on social media, which includes threats to rape Yuma's 8-year-old granddaughter. There are no anti-discrimination laws in Russia which would have provided protection to the family. Miller said the family had no bad feelings towards Cuscfil, saying it's just a company in a capitalist country with a homophobic government. In 2013, Russia passed the gay propaganda law aimed at protecting children from information promoting the denial of traditional family values, and bans the promotion of non-traditional sexual relations to minors in the press and online. Now for the next story. An independent review on how fish farms are regulated is underway in a move to make Scottish aquaculture legislation one of the most effective and transparent in the world. Professor Russell Griggs, OBE, has been appointed to lead the first phase of the review. The appointment is the latest of the Scottish Government's 100 days commitments to be met. On day 81, since the First Minister was voted in, and will highlight what improvements can be made to the environmental, economic and community aspects of aquaculture legislation. And on to our next story. A total of £16.5 million has been awarded to the Net Zero Technology Centre to accelerate a range of energy transition projects that will help deliver Scotland's net zero economy. 7 projects will be developed through the Centre's Net Zero Technology Transition Programme, the NZTTP, to transform the North Sea energy system with a focus on emissions reduction. The programme is expected to deliver £403 billion for the economy and 21,000 jobs by 2050. The funding is being provided through the Scottish Government's Energy Transition Fund and will be match funded by the industry. The Net Zero and Energy Secretary, Michael Matheson, announced the investment during a visit to Aberdeen South Harbour, where he hosted a roundtable meeting with Energy Transition Fund partners alongside other key North East energy stakeholders to discuss the sector's transition to net zero. Now on to our next story. 2 Belarus coaches allegedly involved in attempting to force sprinter Kristina Zimanouskaya to return home have had their accreditation rescinded and been asked to leave the Olympic Village. The International Olympic Committee had said on Friday it had taken action against Artur Shumik and Yuri Mushkinov, who it says also face IOC disciplinary proceedings launched 2 days ago. In athletics, Scotland's Laura Muir has won the silver medal in the 1500 metres women's final behind Kenya's Faith Kipyegon, who won gold. Scots cyclist Katie Archibald and partner Laura Kenny took gold as they won the first ever Olympic women's medicine. Now, moving on to our next story. Earlier today, our Rebecca Munro interviewed Elaine Whyte and Tommy Finn from the Clyde Fishermen's Association in an in-depth discussion of the challenges facing the inshore fishing industry in Scotland following Brexit and COVID. And we are now going to move on to that interview.
Good evening. So today we're going to be discussing the topic of fishing, particularly the possible restrictions that will be imposed on fishermen. And to discuss this topic, we have 2 members from the Clyde Fishermen's Association, which is Elaine Whyte and Tommy Finn. So Elaine, how are you this evening?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty good. And Tommy, how are you this evening?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for taking us on the call.
No problem at all. So I just wanted to briefly ask both of you, I'll come to you, Elaine, first, just what is your role within the Clyde Fishermen's Association?
I'm the Executive Secretary of the Clyde Fishermen's Association, so I've been working with them for just over 6 years. So our role is quite varied. We cover everything from policy to helping in hardship, from developing things like conservation policies for species. All of the above. Every day is different, so you never quite know what it might be.
Lovely. And Tommy, what's your role in this organisation as well?
Well, for the last few years, I've been the chairman of the Clyde Fishermen's Association, proud to be so. Also an active fisherman too, so very much still at the coalface and involved daily in actual fishing practices and seeing what's going on, but more and more just finding that we're involved, trying to keep our members in business, I think. It's a good way to describe it.
No problem. So I wanted to just briefly start off by discussing fishing in relation to Brexit. So, Tommy, I mean, how damaging do you think Brexit has been to brand Scotland in the fishing industry?
I think it's been, like, as a lot of us predicted and feared, probably obviously the biggest effects on the markets. We sort of saw this coming and thought there was reasonable measures in place that would sort of allay our fears a wee bit, but it's just proven to be an absolute nightmare in reality for everyone. Obviously the processors are feeling the biggest brunt of it, but that all knocks down onto the guys catching the product too. So yeah, it's been a bit of a nightmare start off to Brexit for us.
So, Elaine, why did then Scottish fishermen vote for Brexit? Or is this a misleading perception that we all seem to have?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on the programme a number of times, and I think the thing that I've always said and we've stressed from the start is that fishermen vote in all different ways. So there will have been fishermen who voted for Brexit for their own reasons, but that's not all of them by any manner of means. So to say that, we, as Tommy has rightly pointed out, we were continually beating the drum whilst others were talking about a sea of opportunity. We were talking about the security of our markets from the very start. And that was not about taking a constitutional position. That was about taking a practical position and saying, well, look, there's a lot of people here are going to face really great instability. And that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, and Tommy, so to move on to the restrictions now that our NGOs are perhaps wanting to impose on fishermen. I mean, the fishing industry suffered through Brexit, they've suffered through COVID. Now NGOs are currently pushing for more restrictions on fishermen, for example, the banning of ground trawling, which is said to be detrimental to seabeds. They say that fishermen should use creel as an alternative, as a more environmentally kind of friendly fishing practice. Do you agree that this is the case?
I agree that there's a place for creel fishermen. There's no doubt about it. We've always in Clyde Fishermen's Association been of the opinion that there's room for everybody within reason. If it's done balanced and done sustainable, there's room for every type of method. I mean, I think you're referring to the huge pressure that's being put on us now and on the Scottish Government and probably other governments to reintroduce the 3 mile ban that was in place up until 1984. But I think what the ENGOs tend to overlook is that ban was only for bottom trawling using trawl doors. Now I think it's probably well understood and recognised that it's not a damaging way to go about this, like catching prawns or fish on the seabed. Scallop dredging was never banned before. It's never been banned. It was never part of the 3 mile ban. Sea net fishing, which is probably more intense than any other trawling method for catching fish, and like bottom contact was never banned in the previous times. So I think it's just more a convenient way of certain sectors getting a hell of a lot more room for their own interests, and using this as a tool to get that.
Yeah, and Elaine, I mean, research suggests that a trawling ban within 3 nautical miles of the coast, which is an option being promoted by quite a few West Coast fishing interests, may result in an increased gross value added of around £6 million. I mean, is this a universally popular solution?
You did mention a lot of West Coast interests. The first thing I'd say is I'd question that, because I think, and it's not really just about the West Coast, because this mantra is about a national 3 nautical mile limit, so it affects the East Coast as much as it would the West Coast. So in terms of, is it a popular idea? I would say by the majority, no. But there's reasons for that, not because they aren't they aren't for conservation or anything like that. It's because they feel there's a better way. Now, what we do have is IFG structures in Scotland, which is inshore fisheries groups. And this is a forum where fishermen can come together and they discuss the policy and conservation elements that they would like to take forward in their regional area. And it can vary from area to area. So, for instance, what might be a good conservation measure for the Western Isles might not be applicable to Galloway. These types of things are discussed at various regional groups. So we feel that that's the best way to go. And that will allow things like seasonal closures and various other conservation measures to be adopted. I mean, right now, I think we have a paper that's been going through the IFG for quite some time on scallop measures to conserve. And that's the way that we can bring policy forward. What we're finding is that every single fisherman can come to that table, and some are choosing not to. They're choosing to go through media, they're choosing to go because, and you must ask them why. Our theory is that if their idea is not popular, they're not working through those frameworks. They're going elsewhere. So they really aren't working with their neighbours. And that's the conception that people aren't understanding. We need to push that out. Fishermen are sitting down to discuss conservation and the best ways to manage it regionally, and these people are not engaging. And that's what's really quite disappointing. And also we have heard the argument that there are people stakeholders out with fishing who can't attend IFGs. I think IFGs are the only space that inshore fishermen have to discuss things together. But there's plenty of other groups like IFMACs, various conservation events that are held, national consultations that the public can respond to. So the Scottish Government have been fairly inclusive in making sure that everybody has a voice on what happens with fishing. So that's what I would say. If it's a popular idea, it would go through the IFG. If it's not going through the IFG, that's something we have to look at, and that's probably why it's going to media.
Yeah, and Elaine, I mean, the IFG have recently embarked on a pilot project that involves local fishermen of all gear types kind of coming together and working on a solution. I mean, do you think projects like this will be successful and ultimately perhaps the future of fishing?
Well, they have to be. I mean, I think you look at places like Norway and they've had fishermen's councils that have been very successful, and it's allowed them to coexist with different types of industry and different types of fishing as well. So I think we have to make them successful. It's our voice. We've been given a mechanism by the Scottish Government, and I think that's the way we all have to learn to work together, even if we're coming from different perspectives. There has to be consensus. So in terms of the projects that you're talking about, there's an array of projects that are coming through now, whether it's how we work with renewable companies, whether it's how we limit pots in the Western Isles, whether it's how we look at scallop conservation in various regions. The scope is there to do a lot of good work, proactive work, and that's what we're trying to do, working with our neighbours.
Brilliant. And Tommy, in the battle between this kind of static gear and the mobile gear, how do you see this conflict being played out? I mean, do you think that this, what Elaine's saying, will come to be and we will get a mixed gear solution, or does that seem unlikely to you?
I think it's just going to have to be like it always is, just be sensible, try and go through the proper channels. There's the market can only stand so much creel caught prawns. There's always been the creel caught prawn can never supply the scampi market. It's just impossible. And that is probably the biggest earner in Scottish Scottish Nethrops catching is supplying the scampi demand. So that can't be met by creel caught prawns. So there's got to be a balance, and there's got to be a sensible dialogue between both types of fishing. And as Elaine says, that really that's got to be around the table where everybody's sitting there and discussing it and coming to a sensible conclusion after that day's talks have been held. So it's not as if the biggest conflict at sea is, believe it or not, is between different creel fishermen. It's not between mobile and static gear. It's probably between different sectors of like static gear. So the conflict that's perceived to be there is it's not. The market dictates certain things, in the fishing industry, and that is one of them. There's got to be a place for both types of fishing.
And Tommy, the number of creelers you need to replace trawling vessels, apparently it's 168 vessels to 2,128 vessels. Is this sustainable?
So if there was no trawlers, if they did away with trawlers inshore, number of creel boats that would need to replace it. Yeah, but they possibly it's sustainable, like on the stock, but the market, the market would dictate that it's not economically viable. That's the point I'm trying to make. That there's no room for everybody being creel fishermen, unless you gave everybody 10 or 20 creels each to fish with. It's just not. It's not economically, I don't think, a proposition.
Yeah. And Elaine, I mean, with this 3 mile offshore limit, what does this mean for fishermen? And as part of the Clyde Fishermen's Association, what does this mean for fishermen on the Clyde?
Well, just going back to actually, we're a mixed fishermen's association, so we have creel members and we have trawl members as well. We're part of an alliance, which is the Communities Inshore Fisheries Alliance, which has about 430 boats at last count, so it's just under the size of the SFF, I believe. And that has, again, a mixed membership. I think about 277 of those boats are static. So we see that static boats, mobile boats, divers and line fishermen can work together because we see the reality in SEFA is happening nationally. So in terms of what I would want to see, I would want to see that continuing. SEFA is not pursuing a 3 nautical mile limit for a very good reason, because those fishermen are working together and trying to find solutions for coexistence, and in many cases they have. Now, Tommy had mentioned the socioeconomics of the market and what it would mean if we had a 3 nautical mile limit. Well, what it would mean is, firstly, safety issues. A lot of our boats, and contrary to belief, I think I saw something about how people were pursuing a ban on super trawlers in Madagascar, Chinese super trawlers, and there was a comparison to how we should do that in Scotland. Well, firstly, there are no super trawlers in the Clyde. The boats that they are pursuing are maybe 10-metre boats, 15-metre boats, family boats employing 4 or 5 people. Sometimes in a very remote area, they have families to support as well, and there's very, very often not other things that they can go to. As Tommy has mentioned, we already have problems with saturation in some areas of creels. So going to a creel boat would not be a viable option for many of those men who are working in mobile fishing at the moment. And for clarity, as Tommy mentioned, the scampi market and the live and fresh langoustine market are two very different things. So the boats are often doing different, are applying to very different markets. What it would mean if we lose those small family mobile boats is that you're going to lose a lot of the infrastructure in the area too, because we have fuel merchants, we have lots of people who mend nets, we have chandlers, we have all of these things which are reliant on those boats too. Actually, there's quite a lot of plants in factories in North Lanarkshire and South Lanarkshire and Glasgow, etc., who rely on those boats in the Clyde, in quite deprived areas as well, who would lose their jobs. And we've made this point, the supply chain. I think there's a report from Scottish Government which was about optimising the fleet. They did this about a year and a half ago. And that's a very good example of why we need a balanced fishery. They've looked at the economics, they've looked at the social impacts. They know that actually the balance is probably the best way to go.
Yeah. And Tommy, I mean, it's also the Green Party that is pushing for restrictions to be placed upon fishermen. I mean, is there a slight sense to you that the Greens perhaps want to close down fishing or make fishing a lot harder for fishermen unfairly?
I don't think it's slight. I wouldn't call it slight, to be honest. A tad more strong than slight. Yeah, as soon as we saw how things had, how the dust had settled after the last election, we immediately were worried, and I think rightly so. I think there's, without being political at all, I know there's the Green Party, of course there is, and there's a place for sensible environmental concerns. I just worry, not slightly, hugely, that they will try and not be balanced, and they will try and close down mobile fishing as much as they can. Just on the last point, just because statistics always make things a lot clearer. 60% of all the nephrops, certainly in the west coast of Scotland, are tails by live weight that are landed. And if you look at the creel sector, 2% of everything they catch is tails. So it gives you a sort of clearer picture of that the catch composition on the west coast of Scotland and the important role that both sectors have to play in supplying that demand from market.
Yeah, so can you explain the difference between them?
Yeah, okay, so the difference between like what we're calling here as tails would be like a small prawn with just its tail, with the head removed and the claws removed. And that's where you get your scampi from, mostly. Well, pretty much all. That goes to be processed and turned into various grades of scampi. So you like the scampi that you eat in, or you buy in supermarkets, probably different grades of scampi in supermarkets. When you go to a restaurant, when you have your breaded scampi, that all comes mostly from what we're calling tails landed on the west coast of Scotland. It's a hugely, it's a very high demand product. It's a top end product with tails because there's no chemical additives to preserve them at all. And on the west coast, our advantage on the west coast is that we can land our catch and it can be in the factory that same day. It can be processed and it can be making scampi the next day. Some vessels, not all vessels, but some vessels have to add additives, like to sustain their the time that it can be kept on board, and that sort of takes away a bit from the product. But we are lucky in that we can have our prawns in the factory every night, or at least every other night, and that's where we have an advantage fishing inshore. Small guys, small boats fishing inshore, supplying local markets as much as they can, and supplying local factories, and like adding on to the value of the product.
Yeah, so Elaine, I mean, currently there's also negotiations taking place between the SNP and the Green Party about a coalition. And I mean, in regards to these issues that we're chatting about, I mean, what do you expect to happen if this coalition is agreed, or what do you hope will happen?
Well, I hope that we actually pursue genuine sustainable policies instead of something that may look sustainable from the outside. And I think you'll always hear our mantra that any kind of fishing done too much is not good for the environment. So if you have too much mobile, yes, you may damage too much, some flora and fauna on the seabed. If you have too much static, you're going to damage the brood stocks, because the static years out 24 hours, so that tends to catch the females who have their eggs, the buried eggs. So diving's banned in Ireland and in Shetland for stock concern issues, because a good diver will certainly clear a lot of areas. The fact of the matter is, good management is what we need, and sustainable management, so that we're not doing any one of these things too much. And we're making sure that we're keeping the balance for the environment and also for the people who are part of the ecosystem, because this is indeed indigenous fishing communities around the coast, and they're part of the ecosystem too, and are very much like the Norwegian approach, that they're considered, and how they survive. So my concern would be that there's fishing is a very nuanced area, and we're talking about high level sound bites at the moment. Without that understanding, people like Tommy can tell you just there that actually small mobile trawl boats are fishing for a completely different product, a different market, a different type of fishing than the creels are for fresh and whole langoustine. So there's these distinctions that maybe the public don't know about, and who we could blame them. It's very, very complicated. But in pursuit of real sustainability, we really have to be working with the fishermen, with the government, and with the scientists to not just push a mantra that this will work. And as Tommy said, we can't forget, if it is about real conservation, we have to appreciate that some people will do much better financially out of this situation than others. And although they may be pursuing this is an environmental thing, there's issues for like the Torridon box, where it was just creel fisheries, and the catch per unit went down very quickly for that area. So that's why the balance is really important, and it's speaking to fishermen on the ground, not just a couple, not just a few fishermen who have joined forces or who are very well funded by lobby groups. It's about talking to these guys, talking to the IFGs, and talking to the scientists that they work with, because it will give you a different picture. So I'm very much hopeful that the government don't throw the guys who put all their trust in the IFG system out for something that looks to be sustainably minded and isn't, because it's going to have a massive impact in communities. We're talking about giving £50,000 to people to move to coastal communities. My family were from Argyll and moved away because of work. Some of these communities they really need help, and the last thing we should be doing is taking away viable, sustainable ways for them to make that living without fully understanding why it might not be a good idea.
Yeah, and in relation to the fishermen's livelihoods, Tommy, I mean, they've been destroyed by Brexit, COVID, now these restrictions. I mean, whether you agree or disagree with the restrictions, I mean, pushing fishermen offshore is dangerous. They'll need to invest in bigger boats. I mean, this is really changing generations of fishermen's legacies, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. Just at a time when we're talking about keeping young ones in remote areas, and because it's not everybody wants to go and live in the city. A lot of people do, but the only way we can do that, the only way we can retain this next generations, is to give them an attractive way of living. And to me, that is, it's a quality of life, and it's wages. Make sure that they can sustain themselves and be proud of the way they're doing it, not the way things have been going recently, and the pressure that we're coming under. It's affecting. I know it's affecting. I'm probably a bit older now, but I see it affecting the younger guys mentally. I can see I can see it having quite a profound effect in the way that they go about their lives. And there's a genuine concern. If you go on any harbour on the west coast of Scotland, you'll see like concerned guys worried about the future, and it's really it's not because they don't like what they do. It's because they feel so much under pressure. From every way they turn, there's pressure on them. I know COVID affected everybody. Brexit, has it's affected them particularly hard, and all the pressure that we're under. And it's looking like going from. We had a really pleasant, if you like, as pleasant can be, experience with the talks on the future of fisheries management programme that the Scottish Government have been doing for the last 2 or 3 years, and we've been glad to be involved in that, and we can see like all the work and effort we put into it in that future of fisheries management paper. But I'm concerned that might count for nothing going forward if there's a different management regime in place and things are looked at completely different. And I see that in all the guys around the harbours, all the fishermen's faces. You can see the pressure that's on them, and it would be nice to think that sometime soon that we can go back to being the type of people that we were, like when I first left school, and I would love if it could be like that for my son. I genuinely see it in their faces that they're having second thoughts. Is this am I going to be able to make this my lifetime career? I really want it to be, but I'm struggling for reassurance, and I think we need to change that as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I mean, there is also the case of kind of mental health challenges facing coastal communities. Elaine, many fishermen come from generations of fishermen, and it's quite something, is it not, to possibly be the last of a legacy? And you might feel that you've quite personally let this legacy down, could you not?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I'm incredibly worried about, and that's why I work there as we work. That's why Tommy works there as we work. That's why we're all dead. It keeps us up at night because it feels very much to me like we're being told that we can't say it's a culture or we can't say it's Indigenous. Of course it is. It's part of the fabric of Scotland's being that we've had sustainable coastal inshore fishermen. And as I said, we're talking about small boats here, well managed already. We're not talking about big boats that are going out and ripping out everything. I mean, we wouldn't agree with that either. And you can tell a record just by looking at what we proposed for the IFGs. It's all about sustainability. It's all about conservation. We know there's areas that we can work on, and we're trying to. So I absolutely don't want to let this legacy down, because it's important to me and it's important to all of us who engage. What I am worried about is people potentially not understanding this culture and this and the environmental issues and the sustainability issues and the depth that they have to before making decisions. Because with the best will in the world, I mean, I've been a policy person very, very much a distance from actual industry at times, and I haven't understood things as well as I should have, because it's not easy to do so at a desk. But, we hear things like the cod are moving out of the water. Yes, the cod are going north because the water's getting warmer and they're going north. But what we have instead is spur dog coming in. So we've got different stocks. So will we ever be able to restore the cod stocks to how they were however many years ago? Probably not, because the sea is changing. It's a natural environment. It's evolving to deal with and everything. So we hear a lot about what we need to do is restore. I think what we need to do is get reflexive science, and we need to be working with our government to make sure that we have that, so that any decisions that are not made by somebody in Edinburgh or Glasgow or pushed for by somebody in these communities that doesn't quite understand what's happening on the ground. And I see so often these men are cut out of the debate. Now, I said I work for the Clyde Fishermen's Association. Of course I do. But I can assure you that none of our members, Tommy, myself, we don't do a 9 to 5. It's every day that we have to do it. Now, we're facing, a Goliath coming towards us in terms of the funding and resources that these campaign groups have. And we talk about the NGOs. I think any fisherman is environmentally minded if he has any sense at all. So I don't, so we're working with people like WWF on gear changes, etc. That's fine. But we're talking about people who will refuse to sit down with fishermen in a forum and discuss things that they're seeing on the ground and try to come to some kind of compromise. What they'd rather do is go to press with headlines, straplines, take pictures of men, harass them. It's just, and it's the men who are probably doing their most to see a sustainable future and develop sustainable policies. And there just feels that there's something completely off of what's happening at the moment. The money coming from London and various other areas, it would astound you.
Yeah, so Tommy, I mean, there seems to be a general consensus that fishing should be more sustainable. So how do we go about doing this? How do we encourage our government to do this? Is there perhaps any international examples that you know of? I know Elaine's mentioned Norway a couple of times.
There's always new things coming along. To be quite honest, I think we are certainly as a group, the Clyde Fishermen's Association are as close to being, like where we could ever possibly be on sustainability. I think we're unique, totally unique in being the only sort of fishermen's group in Europe. Was that maybe 2 years ago that we had a discard rate of less than 1.5%. And that wasn't us that did that survey. That was a national survey or an international survey. We're on the front line on gear technology. Discards are, as I say, absolute minimum. We don't catch any fish. I find it astonishing that the best fishermen that I know are the guys that are really good at avoiding fish. That was when I left school. That would be totally unheard of. But it's the fact nowadays. Like the good fishermen, the best fishermen are adept at avoiding catching fish. So as it stands now, we're always hoping that there'll be things that we can help that'll come along. But as it stands right now, I really don't, honestly, with 45 years experience, see any way we can go that makes us any more sustainable other than being tied up to the pier. And that is unthinkable.
Yeah, so Elaine, I mean, on Tommy's point of kind of technological advances, they can help fishing productivity. Do you think the UK needs to invest more money into researching how to make fishing far more sustainable rather than trying to shut it down and claiming it as a problem?
Yes, I mean, I think I don't think it's always about investment, huge investments of money. It's about will and it's about resources, staff time and resources. For instance, we done a few trials with Scottish Government and St Andrews University to look at finfish stocks. I think 3 years in a row we did that. There was no objective apart from to find out what was out there, because we heard a lot about how there's no finfish in the Clyde. Our fishermen knew that wasn't true, and as Tommy said, they were avoiding it. And also there's the other point that they can't land it because they don't have quota for it. So we often get a lot of kind of people saying, oh, there's no fish in the Clyde or there's no fish in the West Coast, they're not being landed. Of course they're not being landed because they're being avoided, and they don't have quota to catch them. So they wouldn't want to catch them. They would be in trouble. So I do think, however, that the science does have to be more reflective. And again, I look to Norway. We've done some benchmarking visits with them and exchanges. They have a really good relationship between their government, their universities, and their coastal fleets. Their fishermen are going out and doing science with the government, so that they can be reflexive, so that if they know that there's spawning happening in one fjord, they can close that one fjord straight away. And that's the kind of thing that we should be looking at. And we're not quite there yet, but I am hopeful that if the IFGs, if allowed to continue as they are and they are not derailed, will be that type of answer that we can build it. Because it's not always about money, it's about will and time and resource. And we're being pulled in quite a lot of different directions. But as Tommy said, the Future Fisheries Management paper that the Scottish Government have concluded very much would push you in that direction in terms of working collaboratively and involving fishermen and scientists, because those conversations are so important about the information that can be shared.
So Elaine, regarding the ENGOs that are opposed to yourselves, I've heard that there is some controversy around their supporters, and that perhaps some of the people that you are supporting is actually, they're the same people but under different names, under different organisations. Do you think that that's true?
I don't know if I'm an opinion on it as a personal opinion on it. I would recommend that anybody looks into the money, looks into who is sitting around the funding bodies. There are some very prominent landowners, etc., in Scotland who are involved in the funding of so many of these different groups. There's certainly some real lap over in the staff involved in each of these groups or the trustees involved in each of these groups. That's not something that we're making up. Certainly we've seen the grants coming from London. We can pass them on for you. It runs into the millions. And when you look down at what I'm concerned about is that we probably seen quite a lot of this happening in the Clyde first. There was 3 groups really established, which were all connected through grants. And they were drawing considerably grants each. It was the same individuals who were involved in that. This model has then been taken and is now being developed all over Scotland. And what tends to happen is that they apply to certain funders. They get a huge grant, usually into the hundreds of thousands. They take on staff and they start to develop a community. And that community is usually led by a coordinator who has a paid wage. And they start to develop kind of local projects that are generally led, that, they're very similar to the ones that are happening nationally. Now, you could say, well, what's wrong with that? If you're doing good conservation, there shouldn't be anything wrong with that. But in a way, it's almost like implanting a community, and it takes no notice of the people who were actually there in the first place. And it's well funded. So, for instance, it's somebody like the Clyde Fishermen's Association. We were the first fishermen's association to help develop the no-take zone in Arran, along with Arran Coast and the Scottish Government. We did that. And within a short succession, if you go to to Arran Coast's website now, if you go to the Octopus Centre, if you do any of these things, it's all about what Arran Coast did to create the no-take zone. There's no mention of the fishermen, or there's a very slight mention, or the mention that is there has been written from the perspective of Arran Coast. The fishermen have no say, they've got no guardianship over what they helped to create. And worse than that, they're kind of perceived in a really poor light by these groups. And you're like, well, we tried to be as progressive as we could be. Just for information, our fishermen wanted a larger no-take zone. So these types of stories are being lost by a huge PR machine. And yes, those funding networks, I would encourage anybody to look into them, because all of these community groups, or a lot of these community groups, are being funded to the tune of hundreds of thousands of pounds. It equates to millions per year. And there are some very strategic bodies who are overseeing quite a lot of this development. And yeah, I would encourage people not to believe me, but to check the accounts.
Yeah, it's somewhat concerning. Yes. But anyway, Tommy, I mean, there's been a £1.8 million funding managed by the trade marketing body Seafood Scotland to help Scottish seafood businesses recover from severe economic impact of Brexit and COVID. Was this something that you were among all this, quite pleased to hear about?
Yeah, obviously anything that helps at all, anything that helps the guys through COVID, is much appreciated. Probably 1.8 million wouldn't go very far, with each individual guy, but it's still, it's anything's appreciated to get through this. The thing going forward, yeah, it's we need to keep that going. I don't think it's just that COVID's going to just, once restrictions are lifted, everything's going to be bright and breezy again. I think we've still a lot of work to do to get our markets back. So there's still going to be ongoing help required certainly for our sector, onshore sector. It's going to be a long, hard road to recovery.
And Elaine, more sort of generally, should it be incumbent on not just fishermen, but also on marine tourism, sea anglers and community activists as well, to kind of ensure that they don't indulge in damaging practices in our lochs and our seas?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's all about the balance. I think people, We want to see people enjoying, I think, tourism and leisure and fishing, and it's all part of the culture. We want to keep that. We want to develop that in a very sensible way. But of course, it's all about how you treat the environment, and you don't take out more than you need, etc. It's about balance. So I do think it's on everybody, and for that reason, I'm very much in favour of a big tent approach where everyone has a say and a fair say on a fair playing field. So that's why I support things like IFGs and national consultations, where every stakeholder can feed in and can get feedback about how they are operating and how they should be operating, etc. So I'm not in any way exclusionary. I would like to see everybody included, but I do think there has to be a fair balance of how that process works. It shouldn't be driven by media campaigns. It shouldn't be driven by big money coming from out of Scotland.
Yeah, so Tommy, I mean, there is a perception, I feel, that fishermen are damaging the environment, but is this just of the activities of a very small minority of people that are damaging the environment and therefore damaging the perception of fishermen?
Yeah, I mean, and the reality is that there will always be a bad apple in every barrel. I'm sure it's no different in the fishing industry. In all my years at sea, I think that the biggest problem, or the biggest, probably the biggest influence on the way people perceive fishing has been because of very bad management at the highest level, all the way down. And they can't deny that there was, probably overfishing at some time, but that was probably 60% management's fault and 40% fishermen's fault. As I say, I'm not saying we're all perfect and we've all got loads to learn, but I totally get why there's a perception that, because of these events that are constantly brought up, they were probably the least bad example of bad management. I mean, I can tell you right now, I'm sitting in my hands every week just now, watching perfectly good stocks of hake being annihilated by spur dogs. And I'm constantly trying to bring that to the attention of our fisheries managers, and they seem wanting to be blissfully unaware what's going on. But that is going to have long-term, effects on for probably forever on the balance of stock. So when you protect species, they may be endangered in other parts of Europe or the world or that, but if they're not endangered in the west coast of Scotland, then they become predatory. And that is very much what's happening here. When you start shutting off areas and start protecting species and affecting the balance that's been there since time began, then you're only causing bigger problems. And my biggest problem just now is getting managers to understand what is actually going on, because they can't see it. They don't probably have the resources to go and check what we're telling them, but just for once, if they would just take our word on what's actually going on at sea, to the balance of the biomass of different stocks, that's the problem with bad management. It does untold damage, and then someone has to pick up the tab for that further down the line. Overfishing, it's the fishermen that have to pick up the tab for that. And in reality, it was probably very bad management too. So there's got to be, again, that balance between good, strict management that's proactive and able to react to circumstances very quickly. And to be honest, at the minute and for a long, long time, we haven't had that.
So Elaine, my final question is, do you currently have any plans to raise awareness of the struggles of fishermen, to get discussions started and hopefully make some changes? So what are your next steps?
Well, I mean, as I said, we've been doing this for 6 years. I've been doing this for 6 years, and for every one of those years that I've been in post, this struggle has been happening. It goes away, it comes back, it goes away, it comes back. I think that the plan is that eventually we won't have enough resources to keep doing this, or we will be worn down, which we're not going to do, because there's a lot of families relying on us and we feel the weight of that pressure. We feel the weight of their culture. We feel the weight of their families. It's on our shoulders all the time. So in terms of what we'll do, as I said, we have up until now been working very well with Scottish Government. We have been able to speak to them about, the future of fisheries management, about what we'd like to see about a redistribution of quota, so that, communities can have a start, have some access to different types of quota. They might move away from mono fisheries in some instances. We could get young blood in. We can start to rebuild some of the infrastructure in some areas. Those types of things we've been very keen to kind of, develop, but also to develop conservation policies. As I said, we have a scallop proposal going through the IFG at the moment. We've also got a proposal for limits and gear and management of that sort. These are the types of things that we wanted to do through a process, because that takes a lot of time, as does taking all the time that we spend engaging with different sectors. For instance, someone had mentioned the marine squeeze that's happening now for fishermen. And it's very true. We've got renewables coming on side. We've got aquaculture. We've got cable laying. We've got different types of seaweed harvesting. There's so many other things that are using the marine space that actually we have to deal with on a daily basis. So it's quite hard to be proactive, because a lot of the time we are responding to other sectoral developments. So we can spend a full day in meetings that we haven't arranged or aren't about developing science, etc. So it's a very, very challenging and very, very busy time. So we will continue to do that to our best ability. What we didn't want to have to do was to go down the media route of pushing what good management should be through newspapers, through media, through protests, through all of these things. That's what's happening in Ireland right now. The fishermen are out on the streets. They're going to the Taoiseach's offices in Dublin, their boats. They're lying underneath boats to make a point. It's not nice to see, and we don't want to go down that route where we have to do more extreme campaigning, because we feel it's not fit. The public don't always understand why we might have to do that. We don't want to do that. What we want to do is work through the frameworks that the Scottish Government have set up, and I'd like to continue doing that. However, I do think if we keep being pushed, I think fishermen will make the choice themselves about how they're going to kind of try and tackle that. And I genuinely hope it doesn't come to that point, because we've got very good relationships with the Scottish Government, and we'd like them to continue. They're our government, and we're their fishermen.
Yeah, well, I hope it goes well for both of you in the future and you get what you're looking for. But thanks again to both Elaine and to Tommy for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. Very informative, a topic that I think needs to be discussed more. So thanks for coming on and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Thank you.
And thank you to Rebecca, Tommy and Elaine for that interview. And that's us for this evening. And thank you very much for joining me here at Scotland at 7. And we hope you can tune in once again. And we have the Full Breakfast show on Sunday. Also, as well, Full Scottish show on Sunday. I keep doing that. You'll see me even doing that on Twitter as well sometimes for some reason. But also, as well, thank you very much. And if you ever want to get involved in helping out at Broadcasting Scotland, please feel free. We're always looking for volunteers, and the information will be on your screen just now. And if you would like to subscribe to us to help us provide more shows and basically keep the lights on in the studio, then please do. But once again, thank you very much for joining us at Scotland at 7.